This presentation is based on the needs to prepare children in today's world for 21st century careers. The study is based on asking children to use e-readers and iPads and actually examine the way that they operate and take a look at how intuitively they use these devices, and also in examining what skills teachers need to prepare children for using these devices as communication and as producers of information in the 21st century. So here we have a student's progress. What we did here was we divided the screen into segments. There's a long history of looking at eye movements in children's reading skills. This is part of the literature in the teaching of reading. And we decided to look at children's eye movements as they moved across the screen. In this case, we have an older student who's basically following a typical left to right pattern. This is an 8th grade student, and in fact, he turned out he's a rather slow reader. He has some difficulty with vocabulary, and the question is whether or not reading with an e-reader device or an iPad would assist him in increasing his speed. So using an app on the iPad that required matching idioms, sorry about that, Randall had to scroll from left to right to see each new idiom. His ease of use with the iPad was very high, and he required little assistance. But when asked to search for information, he was not quite sure how to do that. So here's an 8th grader. This is just a typical one case study, but here's an 8th grader who is not quite adept, as we might think he would be, at looking for information. Once it was typed into Google, it took only about a minute to find the information. And of course, he was encouraged to look for something that was of interest to him. So in the next case, what we've done here is we've summarized some of the skills that teachers are currently working on and some of the skills that teachers need to be working on. For instance, Randall needs access and experience with apps. It was unclear whether or not he had experience with different tablets and e-readers. It was unclear whether he had access to the internet at home. He needs the ability to prioritize, categorize, and isolate information. And he needs habits of persistence, tenacity, and problem solving, and the ability to synthesize, create, and evaluate. These are higher level skills that typically teachers do not always, although they aim for them, they do not always get to in a typical elementary school day. What he doesn't need: knowledge level information, repetitive skill work, passive literacy activities such as listening to reading, isolated skill work, or teacher-directed lessons, or rigidly sequenced learning, because as we see on the iPad and e-reader, one moves from site to site without that logically sequenced learning. Now, as a minority student, Randall reads slowly, especially when reading informational text, and this is one of the problems that he was having in school. So here are the questions that need to be asked, and would he be able to read faster with an iPad or e-reader, or would he be more motivated? We saw an increase in his motivation while he was with us in the May Literacy Lab at Salisbury University. Here's another example of a student. This is a 1st grade student, and her eye movements across the screen were recorded by her tutor. And using an app on the iPad that required looking down at letter choices, after looking at the word, she had to look up and down and across the screen. Her ease of use with the iPad was high, and she required very little assistance. She was able to navigate the apps better than her tutor and became instantly engaged and didn't want to stop. Of course, she has an advantage. She's a first grader, and she has access to this device at home. But she has a disadvantage. She is also an English language learner, and her family speaks Spanish at home. Again, a first grader, Eddie, and we saw his eyes move in this direction across the iPad as he's using an app. He was required to look at a letter in a word and then up at a picture and then end at the end of the word and then down at options. Eddie had to look up and down and across the screen. His ease of use with the iPad was high. He required little assistance, and he was immediately engaged and knew where to navigate the apps. So what skills do these first graders need, and what skills don't they need? They need practice in reading up and down as well as left to right. If you are a teacher of first graders, you know that we typically teach children to read from left to right. And we make a big deal about that sweep, that return sweep, and left to right. But in this case, he needs to know that they both need to know that they have the freedom to move up and down. They need to learn how to search and find information. And again, habits of persistence, tenacity, problem solving, and decision making, making decisions about where to go next. These are some things that teachers find difficult to manage in a classroom of 24 students. What they do not need, again, knowledge level, repetitive skill work, passive activities, teacher-directed activities. Learning the iPad through a child's eyes, Stacy, in 3rd grade, her eyes were all over the screen. Stacy had to look up and down and across. Her ease of use was high. She required little assistance and had access at home. She was immediately engaged. Again, this is a 3rd grader who has some ability. She had experienced some work with these devices, but she needs more, and she needs to be able to read and search and find information. She needs habits of persistence and so on. And similarly, she does not need these kinds of skills. So in summary, using the iPad or the e-reader requires a different kind of reading that may or not be intuitive for early readers. Operating the device is very motivating, we found, and acquiring information is just one step. The application and synthesis of information are the strategies that teachers must help children develop.